Yeah. Hi, welcome. I'm Mrs. Meschter, librarian at Chinook.
And I'm Miss SL, librarian at Sylvester. Let's
And we're
talk
here.
books.
Let's talk about books. And it's Women's History Month, and we're celebrating International Day of the Woman on March 8th. So let's talk about books about women's history and girl power.
Absolutely. And I'm going to start with one that ends up on all of the lists, but I can't resist it because it is so, so good. Audacity by, I can't remember her name, Melody. I wrote it down and now I can't remember it. Anyway, we'll find it for you. Can't read my own handwriting, Miss Meshner. That's bad. But it is a fiction account of a real woman in history whose name was Clara Lemlich. I think I'm saying it correctly. And she was a a Russian Jewish immigrant to the United States, and she organized one of the biggest strikes ever on the Lower East Side of New York. Um, for women's working conditions. And I don't know if people have heard of like the Triangle Factory, uh, uh,
The Triangle Shirtwaist Fires. Oh
the
my gosh, those
Triangle
books are so
Shirtwaist
good.
Fires and stuff like that. But it's all related to the fact that women were doing a lot of work um, in New York, a lot of immigrant women, and the working conditions were horrific. And the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory is a famous fire because people lost their lives, and it was all due to very poor working conditions and the safety of certain workers, particularly women and children, not being taken seriously. So Audacity is a fictionalized version of it, but it's really good. And if you love any kind of historical fiction, especially if it's like that sort of immigrant New York kind of setting that we think about people living in tenements and I can like visualize the setting in my head. Audacity is great, but it also shows how one woman who was not she didn't have power, but she grew power out of unity of women, and I think that's one of the best things to celebrate.
That book, Audacity, goes perfectly with the nonfiction book Flesh and Blood So Cheap about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fires and about Clara Lemlich. Like that book is, the nonfiction is so good. And it's where I first really understood the role of working women and the danger that working women face that men did not face. And anyway, so good. So both of those are great choices.
All right. What do you, well, you told us about a nonfiction, but it was kind of piggyback. Do you have another you want to
Oh,
share?
do I have another book I want to
Yes,
share?
I know.
You know I do. You know I do.
This is a full.
Well, so frequently when we talk about Women's History Month, we talk about mostly nonfiction. So I'm going to start with nonfiction. I mean, when we talk about books, like we tend to get stuck in that because we're thinking history. But I also have a fantasy and a realistic fiction and two graphic novels that I am like, if we get there, we get there. So Almost Astronauts and Pure Grit, they kind of go together about women who have like forgotten, who have been forgotten in history. Like Almost Astronauts, these are women who completed the astronaut training program. They were supposed to go on Mercury 13. They completed the training program. Like a group of women completed the program. Like they pilots, astronauts, they're completely astronauts, but they did not go to space. Men were selected at the end. And so women have this important role in aviation history and space exploration, space studies, and STEM, and yet we forget about the role of women. Like we highlight Buzz Aldrin and we forget about the women who were the test pilots and who were in flight machines and flight simulators. And so Almost Astronauts, super good. And it's beautiful pictures, like it's nonfiction, it's not illustrated, but it's documented with illustration, photographs, as well as text.
I love that. I love to see the real people too.
Me too.
Really
Me too. Like it's just, these are the things that I get like a little passionate about. And you know what? If I were to go to college again, I might be a women's studies major actually. So like these get me like
that is very cool. I like studies classes. It wasn't my major, but I took a number of them and really enjoyed them. And I really loved where they met with some of my English classes, especially talking about linguistics and how
Hmm.
linguistics are used to oppress people. And that still
Hmm.
happens today. So, you know,
Just that piggybacks well into Moxie.
great.
Because Moxie is about sexual harassment, and it's about, I mean, like, it's about all the things, and words are one of those ways that continuously like bring
Yes.
women down.
And Moxie is awesome, the book, and it's being made into a movie, or it has been.
I think it was one of those like victims of COVID that has been made, but has had a delayed release.
Yeah. All I know is Amy Poehler's involved, so I'm in of anything that she does. So,
Moxie is so good, and it talks like, have you read it?
I have read it. I like it.
So much, but I love the way that it even addresses the way that women hurt other women, like we judge other women, and like it's hard world.
It is a hard, and some of that is a defense mechanism. Not
Absolutely.
not excusing it.
No, no.
When you have to play by the rules that someone else has set, typically men.
Hmm.
No offense, guys.
Nope.
Sometimes you inadvertently or very much advertently hurt people to keep yourself safe. And women have been put in that uncomfortable position. That's why I do really like anything that celebrates women's unity and women's friendships. And I was uh, I was looking for one that was on my list that does that, and I'm like, oh wow, I missed some things that I wanted to put on there. I do want to talk about related to that, uh, Naomi Novik, who writes adult fantasy.
Hmm.
She has started taking sort of folk tales and folklores from other cultures.
Hmm.
She took um, Uprooted, which I think is based in Eastern European folklore,
Hmm.
probably like Polish or Ukrainian, and Spinning Silver, which is based in Jewish folklore.
Hmm.
And they're adult books, but they're perfectly readable, enjoyable by people who are our students' age.
Hmm.
Um, but I love that the women are, because they have the fairy tale folklore quality to them, but the women are empowered, and
Hmm.
they do work in women's friendship, especially Spinning Silver, because the the main character, it's all based on like one of those fairy tale marriages where she has to perform certain tasks, and she's under
Hmm.
the power of this sort of like, I forget what the characters are called. They're not elves, but they're like mystical creatures of
Hmm.
like the winter. Um, and some of what she does to outsmart this mystical creature involves the help and empowerment of other women, which I enjoy. But Uprooted doesn't. It, the main character does what she does because a friend of hers, a woman friend, is
Hmm.
imperiled, so she connects herself. I'll just say she marries the dragon, but I don't want to tell you what that actually means because it gives away too much of the story. But then it's all about men's magic versus women's magic, because she learns magic and how different it is, and how men's magic is very much spells and traditional things that we think of, and she discovers her magic through storytelling, which I think is
Mm.
women are so good at, because
That sounds
the histories of our families, and everything is woven in a story. I love that so much. Sorry.
that sounds so wonderful, and reminds me of Truthwitch.
Tell
Other
me.
hand. So Truthwitch is about two, like, they're best friends. They protect each other. They both have magic, and they're both main characters. Like, it alternates by chapter. One of them is a truth witch, which is a power that like everybody hungers for, and they want to control the truth witch, because controlling the truth witch means you can see which of your enemies is, you can see the power in truth, but also that ties in with storytelling. Like her power is in words, and she sees words and she can understand the truth and the lie in people's words. And it's an adventure story. Like, I mean, the main character doesn't want to be controlled. Her best friend has like assassin type abilities to protect her, and her best friend's magical powers is tied to weaving. So again, this like feminist magic, and they get separated in the course of the story, and they have to like, there's a quest to reunite as best friends, because they are best friends. Like they call each other their heart sisters. And
Okay, so what, isn't there something about a thread?
oh yeah, but I cannot talk about that and spoil it. It would spoil. But that thread, the thread that it talks about, is part of the magic of weaving. And
I'm not here to spoil. To be full disclosure, everyone, Miss Meschter told me that she was going to talk about it, and I read Truthwitch, but I didn't read the next two books. And now that she's talking about it again, I have to read.
You have to read them.
I have
also,
to read.
Also, Truthwitch is there is a like a romance that it's not like, you know, it's kind of like a whatever. It's about the friendship. But the other two series in the series have a romance, and Blood Witch, which is the third one, definitely has a smoldering romance.
Ooh.
Also, though, still about the friendship of these two girls. So it's.
And don't we meet the character that I think it's based on in the first book? And the
Yes.
whole time I'm like, this
Yes.
is going to be something.
Yes.
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 All right. Now I got to catch up. Now I have to catch up.
This was a series that I started thinking, oh, this will just be like a one. And no, I pre-ordered everything that came after. And
well, if we're talking about fantasy, and we end up talking about fantasy because we like fantasy a lot, and women do often get to be powerful in fantasy
exactly
novels, which I appreciate, and I think many writers use that to great effect, better than some of our more traditional writers. Some of our best classic books, women characters are terribly written because they're written by men who don't bother to try to understand about women. But many of male, female, whatever fantasy writers really go out of their way to understand human nature. I think because you're writing about other things that are out of human nature, you have to really ground yourself in what is human nature. But
right.
that's just my, dime store critical analysis of that. But I've wanted to talk about the Folk of Air, Holly Black books, because I love them and I love Holly Black. But it is a fantasy, and it is based in a world that is of elves, and two human girls who end up living in the realm of the elves for reasons I won't tell you. But they're twins, and I can't remember the one sister's name, but Jude, who's the main character, is so amazing because she is so strong, and she has to be so conniving. And women who do any kind of like maneuvering or strategy are often called some nasty words, while men are called, ambitious and clever and good at strategy and stuff. Jude, if I were ever planning a war, I would want Jude as my war strategist because she just is so smart.
So smart. And she's a human in an elf world. So she's like, she has to work 4 times harder than anybody else around her to stay alive.
Right. The only advantage she has is elves can't lie and humans can, and boy, is she good at it.
She's really good. So like the opposite of Truthwitch, but I think actually grounded in the same element, like of storytelling and seeing the truth in words.
Absolutely.
Similarly, Master Strategist and Darken is a feminist retelling of the reality of the mythology of Frankenstein. I mean, Dracula.
Yeah.
And holy moly, I would take her on my team too. So in real life, Vlad Dracul Vlad the Impaler was a real Transylvanian royalty. And in the book And I Darken, Kiersten White takes the character in gender bends and turns him from a male into female. And so then, in addition to all of the things that real Vlad the Impaler did to become as sinister as he was, takes that and levels it up. Now imagine having to go through all those obstacles as a woman, and imagine trying to survive in a harem in the Ottoman Empire, and what would it take to like all these other things. It's so good.
Well, Kiersten White is excellent anyway. She's
Kirsten.
so good. And I'm sorry, my cat heard you talking about Dracula and decided she would make an appearance.
You mean you're familiar?
My familiar, yes, thank you. I think Hazel would say I'm her familiar, quite honestly. But but no, I'm glad you brought that up because that wasn't even on my radar to talk about today. But horror is a great way to empower women in books and has been forever. I mean, Carrie, you can't not talk about Carrie, which is the ultimate like Carrie is so much a metaphor for things that people don't try to understand about women, so they mythologize them or turn them into something scary and terrifying and whatever. And Carrie kind of takes that in a very literal way.
Mhm.
And all the things that happen to her that are bad things are really people's reactions to not trying to understand her as a person.
Mhm.
And then, of course, she goes all Carrie on them, which is terrifying but also amazing. But then, I want to go back to Kirsten White's Elizabeth Frankenstein book, which is super good, and I'm sure that's not the name of it. So, it's something Elizabeth Frankenstein there, the Diary of Elizabeth Frankenstein or some.
Something I thought it was Elizabeth Frankenstein. Well, it's
Maybe it
we'll
is.
put the real title in the comments. That's what.
Yes. Thank goodness. Thank goodness for Miss Meschter and her ability to like find the actual words and share them, because I always come with like, I remember that book. What's it called again? but but that book doesn't do the gender swap that As I Darken does, but it takes a real character from Frankenstein, because the Dr. Frankenstein was engaged in the book,
Mhm.
and then married, and there's a whole thing about that. But it kind of turns what she sees happen with Frankenstein's monster from her perspective. It turns it on its head,
Right.
and it has a very sort of clever feminist twist in there, because if you read the real Frankenstein, it's told from Dr. Frankenstein's perspective,
Right.
and if you read her book, he wasn't being completely honest. So,
Well, she's really masterful at that because of these retellings. So the Guinevere Deception, also by Kiersten White, is about the story of King Arthur and Guinevere, and it's definitely retold. Lancelot in that story is female, and she serves as a queen's knight, not as a king's knight, and is part of the round table, but not because she's female. And it's really, yeah, fantasy is definitely a place where you can explore the power of being female and take a look at some of those traditional stories, and how might the perspective be different if women could read and write and tell the history.
yes, yes, and as we've been coming to find out, and really shed a light on this year, I think, they always say, the winners, the history is told by the winners, and so
Mhm.
people with power maintain power by presenting history, presenting ideas, even presenting fiction and stories in ways that highlight or glorify what they've done, as opposed to telling everybody's stories. So,
Mhm.
some of these books that we're talking about are really just, they're a long time coming. They're a way to look at the world through a woman's perspective, or um, get the woman's version of what happened, because that wasn't told for the longest time.
Mhm.
Although the next thing I want to mention is a book written by a man, because
It's okay.
I love a
But
I love, we've talked about this with Cinder. I love a retelling of a fairy tale. And this is Garth Nix, Frog Kisser, because first of all, it's light and it's funny and it's charming and it has all the sort of fairy tale things you like with spells and magic, and it's Frog Kisser, so you kind of know where we're going with this. But the main character, she does not want to be a princess. She does not want to kiss any frogs or have any princes, and she's looking for a way definitely to save herself, but to save everyone else in the process without having to give up her independence. And it's adorable and I love it so much.
Nix also does a really good job. He's such an ally, I think, is the best way to describe him. The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth Nix also has equally empowered, like women are just as empowered as men, but also it deals a lot with like what it means to be transgender, and does gender really even matter in terms of a power structure. And so the Left-Handed Booksellers of London.
Yeah, and you've recommended that one to me, and it is on my list. And why haven't I read it yet? Ah, there's not enough time.
There's not enough time.
But there is enough time. Make time to read, everybody.
And then just, I'm going to switch back to nonfiction because I want to make sure to talk about Pure Grit, the other book behind me, because I can just talk about books all day long, and my like spiderweb brain will just keep going. But I want to make sure to highlight Pure Grit, because when we're talking about like history being told by men, women were definitely actors and important parts of history, and Pure Grit is a history, so it's nonfiction, also documented with illustration or photographs throughout, like photographs of artifacts. It is about women who were nurses during World War II stationed in the Philippines. So during World War II, there's few places that women could actually serve to in a real capacity. Women could be in the military as nurses. And so these were nurses stationed at Bataan in the Philippines, or Manila. I mean, like war, like the position keeps changing. But women who were in the Philippines prior to World War II, and then survived the invasion of the Philippines by Japan, and then being forced to march to a POW camp that we now call the Bataan Death March and the Bataan camp. And the way that they like they're nurses, so like they have a real job of medical like nursing. The way that they took care of the men, the way that they learned on the fly medicine to treat trauma, to treat tropical diseases, tropical infections, keep people walking on this massive journey to a POW camp. So Pure Grit is about them, and it's their story, and it follows these stories. Like I'm even talking about it, I just get choked up. Like this is inspiring, and also these are stories that we don't talk about. So like when we talk a lot about World War II vets, I think we highlight male vets. When we talk about like Veterans Day, even now, like 2020, recently, now 2021, we tend to highlight men who have served. And we know that women are part of our armed forces, and women are vets and have all of those responsibilities that men do. And so this is a good story to learn more.
Sounds awesome. I'm adding that to the list. Oh my gosh, this is dangerous. And also, I just like field nurses in general are some of the strongest people I have ever encountered in my life. And not just because I couldn't do what they do, because I'd say, ew, ookie, but also like you have to be like really strong to help somebody else not fall apart.
Yes.
And especially in pain. And it's just, it blows my mind every time I think about what they do. And if anybody, has like ever gone to the hospital, and there are male nurses and female
Absolutely.
nurses,
Absolutely.
all nurses, but traditionally they have the not harder job than doctors, but they have the more human contact.
The physically demanding.
Yeah, the more physical, and yeah, absolutely. So, I'm always blown away by that. Oh, Miss Meschter, you're going to make me talk about one nonfiction, and we know I'm not the biggest nonfiction reader, which is a shame because there are some great nonfiction stories, but I tend to gravitate towards fiction more often than not. But I did read, and I got it for Sylvester's library, even though it's an adult book, Lab Girl by Hope Jahren.
Oh,
Hope Jahren is a real scientist, and she is living, and you can, look her up. And she decided to write a book about what it was like being a scientist as a woman. She particularly deals with like plants and nature science the most, though she has
mhm,
worked in places where she's had to deal with science of like warfare and stuff. But she writes about what took her on this journey. She grew up in a not so warm, loving family in Minnesota, and her father was the town, because it's a very small town's science teacher, and how she was drawn into that, but with sort of a lack of warmth or intimacy. And
mhm,
this book is such a love letter to nature and
mhm,
science. Some of it reads like poetry when she talks about like the lives of trees and plants, but also just like because she was a woman, she had to fight harder for any money. She had to fight harder to keep her lab partner because he didn't have all the degrees she had. She's had to fight and fight. When she started a family, she was terribly discriminated against. And this isn't that long ago. This is recent history, but the pain, and she had some mental health issues, and the pain and everything that she went through all comes down to she is a smart woman who loves what she does,
mhm.
and things weren't going to stop her. And in fact, she has a new book out that's about climate change that I'm really eager to read, but haven't gotten it yet. But if it's anything like Lab Girl, which is a very personal story, and she doesn't pull any punches. She tells you everything that she went through. Um, Man, I will read it in a heartbeat, because it that again, I'm not a big nonfiction person, but that was wrenching. That was such a good book. Loved it.
Okay, so that leads me to my final book. And then, because I think we got to start wrapping up,
We gotta
but
wrap it up, or we could go all day.
all day. My final book, Radium Girls. It's a nonfiction, right?
Girls, I love Radium Girls. Sorry.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea. So Radium Girls is about women who work in a watch factory painting radium onto watch faces in the 20s. Working in factories, so again, like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, working in factories, one of the few places a woman could work, and generally those were for unmarried women, like in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. And like in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, working conditions were unsafe for women because men were like, she's going to get married and leave soon, or they dismissed a lot of the causes. So like as you were just talking about with Lab Girls, there was a lot of discrimination just in the workplace structure. And what these women did is they painted radium, which made the watch face glow onto watch faces. So they dipped their paintbrush into this radioactive substance and painted. And to keep their watch or their paintbrush nice and tight, they licked it. And so they were sticking this radioactive substance into their mouths. And so, of course, this book, we discover that radium is radioactive and dangerous, phosphorus is. And they developed, all the women covered in this book developed something called Fossy Jaw, which, look it up, it's horrifying. And it talks about like the workplace conditions that were enacted because of the awful things that these women went through. And honestly, like I read this book and I was like, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
happened? And do I need to get rid of my watch?
Well, thankfully,
No.
some things have changed. But no, I read Radium Girls, and then a friend of mine who does local theater, she was in a play based on it, and it was, I mean, the book and the play amazing. And you think, I mean, if you tell what the story is about, like a certain part of you is like, but then to actually put yourself in what they were going
Yes.
through.
Yes.
And again, especially it's more harrowing when you think about how little power they had over their own lives.
And how callously they were treated. I mean, I'm like, you read this book and you're like, am I reading fiction? No, this is nonfiction. It's a gut punch and it's well written and it's amazing.
Yes,
So that's my
agreed.
final book for today.
Well, that I don't keep adding. I can't top that. I mean, I want to throw out, like, also the little stories, like, about how hard it is to be a girl, like not even a woman yet, and try to make decisions about who you are and what your future is. I had thrown love, hate, and other filters,
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, yes.
because I mean there is a bigger story, because there's an element of terrorism that the main character gets faces discrimination for because she is a Muslim American, but it's also because of that background that even deciding where she wants to go to college and who she wants to be in her life is brought into question because her parents have very strong ideas, and good girls don't say no,
Mhm.
but they do.
But they do.
But they
And
do.
they do. And on that note, these are all good books that you should all check out. We'll link all the titles in the comments so you can follow up or just read our comments. That's fine. And we will see you all later. So thank you.